Okay, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer. I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please take a second to turn off your phones so we don't have any disruptions. As for announcements, registration is currently open for this year's summer camp, which will be held July 11th through the 15th for ages 6 through 11. Contact Jennifer if you're interested in registering at info@ameliamuseum.org. We have been working with the city and the Peck Alumni Association to create a permanent exhibit about Peck High School, which will be installed in the Peck Center. So it will tentatively be opening in late July, so keep your eyes open for updates about that. For upcoming programs, our June Brown Bag Lunch on June 1st will be with Shamira Weiss, who's a local artist who creates sculptural work with found materials like plastic. And then our June 3rd on the 17th will be with Victoria Machado, who will speak about efforts to restore Florida's waterways. And both of these programs in June will be held at the Peck Center because we'll still have the waterways exhibit in Baker Hall. So through a grant called Museum on Main Street, we currently have a traveling Smithsonian exhibit in Baker Hall, which is why tonight's lecture is off-site. It explores water from a broad point of view, so environmentally, culturally, etc. The exhibit will be open until July 2nd, so if you haven't checked it out, please do. Tonight's exhibit opening is our local complement to the Smithsonian exhibit, exploring water in our own community. It's called Atlantic Amelia. It talks about the history of our beaches here. And tonight's talk is our third water-related program in conjunction with the Waterways exhibit. So I'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight's program and our exhibit opening. This program is a partnership between the Florida Humanities, Smithsonian Institution, and the Amelia Island Museum of History. Funding for this program was provided through a grant from Florida Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that's it for announcements, but tonight we have Julie Hauserman. Julie is the author of Drawn to the Deep, the remarkable underwater explorations of Wes Skiles, which was the winner of the 2019 National Outdoor Book Award for History/Biography. She is a longtime journalist who was a Capitol Bureau reporter for the St. Petersburg Times in Tallahassee and a national commentator for the National Public Radio Show's Weekend Edition and The Splendid Table. Her essays are featured in several Florida anthologies, including The Wild Heart of Florida, The Book of the Everglades, Between Two Rivers, and Unspoiled. So everyone, please welcome Julie.
Well, thanks so much for coming out for this. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk to you about a world that you don't normally think about, which is the world beneath our feet. And you don't normally think about people swimming underneath there. But there are people who are swimming underneath there all the time, all over the world, and especially in Florida, because we have such an amazing amount of caverns and caves beneath the fields that you drive by. There might be a dome there that could be, you know, a cavern is big enough to park a 747 in. So what I'm going to bring you today is the story of Wes Skiles. He was an incredible explorer. He grew up in Jacksonville. He was a National Geographic explorer, became one. I met him when I was a reporter many years ago. Many years ago, when we were fighting a giant dairy that was coming in on top of the cave systems outside of High Springs, Florida. So Wes lived in High Springs, which is just north of Gainesville, if you've ever gone in that area. And Ginny Springs, he lived right across the street from Ginny Springs and spent a lot of time there. And we'll talk a lot about Ginny and the discoveries that they've made in that area. Wes died at age 52 off of Palm Beach, Florida. He wasn't in a cave. He wasn't, stuck back there, writing a note to his loved ones. He was working on a discovery show for Nova. Do you know if you ever Nova? It was a PBS show, and he was working for Nova, and he was something happened with his equipment. Is basically what happened. So 1 minute he was diving and filming these Goliath grouper, and 1 minute he wasn't. So he was found on the bottom of the sea, and the cause of death was drowning. He became one of the most famous photographers in the world in a place with no light. That's the thing that really, really intrigued me so much about doing this project. I was asked to do this project by University Press of Florida. They came to me and asked me would I do this biography of Wes, and I was thrilled to do it. I didn't really count on how difficult it is to really do a biography and go through someone's life. What would you like someone to put in about you or leave out? There was a lot of weight to it. And I also had a lot of problems with thinking, this is a guy who left all this visual film, and so it almost felt more like it would be a film than a book. So that was a real problem as an artist for myself to do. But I realized finally what I could do was tell people how they get those documentaries. How do they do this? What are these expeditions like? And so that's pretty much what my book is about. Being an explorer, being an aquanaut is what I call these folks, aquanauts. They are very secretive. They're very tribal. They didn't really want to talk to me at first, because think about it. All you ever hear about cave divers is they died. There's a story in your paper. Those people are crazy. I would never do that. Everyone also has to tell me I would never do that. Now, if I was writing about astronauts, no one would say, I would never go to the moon. But people feel like they have to tell me that they would never do it. Well, I would never do it either. I'm your friendly explainer from above, and it's because we've swum over those springs and caves, and there stirs something in our belly, something uncomfortable, that great beat below. I thought that the cave divers would be people who fought down their fear in order to do this work, but it turns out they love it. And we ended up calling them claustrophiliacs. My friend came up with this idea. Rather than claustrophobics, they love it. It feels enveloping to them. It feels like the mother is around them. They're in the flow. They're completely engaged in what they're doing. And for them, they can't be reached. For them, it's a wonderful experience. So that was interesting to me. I interviewed over 50 cave divers for my book. So I've talked to a lot of different people who've been inside of our planet. It was really a privilege to be able to talk to these folks. Just a minute about the art of this. So when Wes began photographing inside the planet, there wasn't any equipment. There wasn't digital equipment. There wasn't underwater cameras that could really withstand going way down in there. So they had to make their own equipment. They would rig up aircraft landing lights, and they would make their own housing for the cameras to keep them from getting wet, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. At that time, you'd just get these films of just a person with a flashlight going through a dark cavern. So what his genius was painting with light. And I start with this image. This is in Hualta in Mexico. And I start with this image because you can see how he's painted this with light. So they've put lights down in here. They've put lights up in here. He's put people in different areas so that you get a sense of the scale of this place. I mean, it's just a remarkable image, isn't it? A photograph like this could take weeks and a giant crew of people. You could be carrying things on burros through the jungle and rappelling down through small holes and, creating pulleys to get all of your equipment in there. Quite harrowing and quite an incredible art form, isn't it? To be able to show people what we would never be able to see. This is one of Wes's very famous photographs. This is at Ginny Springs where the Santa Fe River, which is tannin from the swamps, it collects that dark dye, and where it meets the spring at Ginny Spring, you get this beautiful, incredible image that he was able to get on the pictures when the sun was at the perfect time. Now, I've seen people recreate this image. You can see there's an image of it, but you know, he was the first one, and he was always looking, where's that light today? Where's that light? What's the clarity of the water? What has there been a recent rain? So many things went into every single photograph that he made. And of course, he couldn't look on his camera because you have to wait and get, I mean, in the early times, you have to wait and get the thing developed. So you didn't know what you had. So that was another whole aspect of it. And also with the film, before there was video cameras where you could have come up and have instant replay. He would choreograph with all the different people that were involved in the expedition. You're going to go here, you're going to go there, you're going to go there. They draw it all out beforehand because you can't really communicate too well underwater. So yeah, that's a really neat photograph. That hangs in the Great Outdoors Cafe in High Springs. Have you ever been there? This is Dipolder Cave. This cave is near Weeki Wachee, if you know where that is. This is 250 feet below the surface, which is just so deep. 90% of Floridians get their drinking water from the aquifer. So they're swimming in your drinking water. Sometimes they would knock on people's wells. Boom, boom, boom. You know, they'd see all the things sucking out of the aquifer. You know, Florida's aquifer has 36% of the water of all the 5 Great Lakes. I mean, it's just one of the most largest stores of fresh water on the planet. So this is Dipolder. So like 250. So you're gonna have to decompress. This could be a dive that would take you, I don't know, over 20 hours probably, because you know you have to decompress so that you don't get the bends when you come on up. People are still diving this cave today. It's kind of a badge of honor if you've done it because it's so deep. So this is another one where I wanted to show how he lights things. So, you know, you wouldn't be able to see inside this mask. So he's lit that so you can get a sense of the adventure of doing this. He's lit back here so you can, the guy's coming. And this is the line. So all cave divers use this line in order to find their way out. It's very easy to get disoriented. If your flippers hit silt, you can get disoriented. You can get completely obscured visually, and you can't tell which is up and which is down. Wes used to say, I try not to think about the tons of rock above me when I'm down there, because if I think about it, I'll flip out. I have to stay very calm. They have to stay very calm in order to do these incredible expeditions. They'll do stuff like stage bottles, you know, in various parts over weeks before to make sure that there's fail-safes for everything. They use scooters that are almost like a jet ski, an underwater jet ski, so they can go farther than you could just by swimming. Now the equipment has gotten so advanced, they're using like Mars rovers, like Jupiter rovers, stuff like that, to get into places where they can't. These cave divers would go places that were so small they'd have to take their tanks off, go through a hole, and then pull the tanks over, which is simply death-defying, isn't it? But these are people, these are athletes. You know, they're very, very well trained, and they work on this stuff all the time. This is the Mole Tribe. This was Wes's group that would dive together. Very important to have simpatico people that you can count on. And these guys went all over Florida looking for small little holes in the ground that they could go into. This was taken in the Bahamas in the Blue Holes, and I'll tell you more about that later. He made a photo there that was the National Geographic top 10 photos of all time. This is what I was talking about they like to be in small places, and this is Wes as a young boy somewhere in Jacksonville at a construction site. He wanted to get in wherever it was. He wanted to get in there, and that's a very unusual, it's just to me it's unusual, people who like that, but they do. That's Wes. He's probably 16 years old there. He was such a remarkable diver and so at home in the water that he became a sheriff's recovery diver when he was 15, 16 years old. He would go to Ginny Springs. He's, like I said, he grew up in, your basic, 50s house in Jacksonville. But he would go over to Ginny and camp and live over there with the hardcore divers. And he learned from the best. And so when something happened, he was the one that they called to get someone out. And he wasn't a super serious person. He was actually quite silly and fun. That's one thing that I like to remember to tell people, because you think, well, this is very, very technical and serious. He was real fun, and he was a real goof. This shows also going in our aquifer. So that's just one of the tunnels, and it just gives you the sense of what it's like under there. So this is bedrock from Africa, from when we split, when our continent split, and so they find all kinds of stuff under there. And ancient dugongs, which are manatee, the ancestors of the manatee, and camels, and all manner of things that get washed in, bodies, all kinds of stuff. In Mexico, there's a lot of human sacrifice remains they find in the caves, because people would throw people into the springs as an offering to the gods. So you never know what you're going to find in there. So many creatures that live without light. That's pretty interesting. Blind crawfish. You never know what the cure for something is going to be when you find a very specific animal like that way down beneath our feet. This is Sheck Exley. He's probably one of the most famous cave divers in the world. He's since passed. But the funny thing is, Wes lived near him. And that's how he, got on this path, really, was he happened to have one of the greatest cave divers in the world living nearby him. So Sheck, he was the first one to write books about cave diving, the first one to tell, about cave diving, and to show people what was at stake, and that there was this natural resource that really needed protection. But it was really about sport. Who could be more endurance? Who could go farther? Very macho. They call it cave booty. Who could get the booty, get the first virgin cave before someone else? You'd follow someone's line, and that would end, and you'd want to go further. So a lot of it was just that exploration aspect of it, of wanting to be the first person to see something that no one has ever seen. And you're pretty clear, if you're going to the end of the rope, that no one's ever seen what you're going to see around the corner. Whether it's a mastodon or, blind crawfish raining from the ceiling. I asked all the cave divers what was the weirdest thing that they ever saw down there. And my favorite one was, what was it? It was a boot with a foot in it. A skeleton foot. Story there, right? Yeah. I think it would probably involve an alligator, but I don't know. So this is the mole tribe. So they would just be going all along, imagining where these routes would go, making these maps. In the beginning, they would use string to, while they're going to measure all the caves and hand draw. Wes was remarkable in that if he remembered a map, he would remember it. He had a gift of spatial awareness. Later on and now it's very different with GPS and, sonar and all the things that you can do. But back then you had to do it by hand. And so that's the kind of thing they were doing. They'd head out at dawn. They also dive at night because it doesn't matter if there's light. It doesn't matter. So there's, as I write in the book, there is a visceral difference between those of us who would go to a dark river in the middle of the night and go into a hole in the bottom of it, and those of us who would not, right? No way. This is what Wes liked to call the ant farm type of photography of showing this. So he would leave the top dark and the bottom darkish, to show this is a cross-section of the earth. And he really liked this type of image, and I think it is awesome because it shows the treacherous way and how they're trying to get through the earth and investigate what's in there. This is another one. This is in our aquifer. This is outside of Ginny Springs. Those are the ancient bedrock. It's so fascinating. As I was writing the book, I went down a million different scientific rabbit holes because I became obsessed with I'd read one thing and I'd whoa, with the bedrock and what's in the bedrock and what's about sinkholes was another one that I got, I had to say, hey, come on back. You're rewriting this guy's life. But, sinkholes open up all the time, all over the planet, every day. And there's a million fantastic stories about it. If the Earth swallows you up, well, not much you're going to do about that. Can't really be scared of it. So this is Wes using one of the, at that time that was the be-all, end-all camera. These things were huge. If you had to haul them through the woods, they weighed a ton, and they called them big babies, like you had to change their diaper. There was always something going wrong with them. But in this way, he was able to begin, once he started being a National Geographic worker and working for Discovery and working for NOVA, he was able to afford these amazing pieces of equipment. I'm not sure where this one was filmed. So this is Wes with all of his equipment. That's just for one dive. You can see that you got to have backups for your backups for your backups for your backups, and this is the old school stuff. They were the Central North Florida divers were innovators around for the world. They developed different techniques of how they use their tanks, how they, what different kinds of breathing gases, things like that. So they were known all over the world. This landscape, karst, K-A-R-S-T, that has the Swiss cheese holes that Florida has, it occurs in other places in the world. So people are doing this in other places in the world too. France is a big place where Yugoslavia has a lot of karst. This is the boil at Ginny Springs. So this is your water coming out of Mother Earth, right? Just boiling out like that. It's absolutely amazing. They would come across things like this all the time. They would come across eels. The eels that are in these springs on the Suwannee go all the way down the Suwannee and out into the Gulf and around Florida and out to the Sargasso Sea. It's just simply astonishing. And then they have more eels out there, and they come all back. The alligators would come out of holes, and they would punch them in the nose. Just magical things that they would see below there that you just wouldn't even imagine. And this boil is just, it's just magical to me. I wish that I had to film because it's really neat how it's like. These are mastodon bones that are in the bottom of Wakulla Springs, outside of Tallahassee. They found an entire mastodon down there. This is a great Wes photo right here. This is the Santa Fe River, and this is Devil's. There's two springs, and I'm sorry, one's Devil's Ear and one's Devil's Eye, and I can never. Are there any divers in here who can tell me the difference? Okay. This is how he was such an artist. So he made this crazy ladder pod where he welded several ladders together to make this big thing so he could get way up. And then he had divers light this spring here, because normally you'd canoe past this, it would just be all black. You wouldn't even notice it. But of course, he worked for years to get this image, and it's just so remarkable because it shows the absolute beauty and amazement of these springs that are flowing into the Santa Fe River. The Santa Fe has so much history in it, so many artifacts. You can just find these giant shark teeth there, tons of mastodon bones, camel bones. It's so rich with resources. The Santa Fe is incredible. This is Wes's son, Nathan, hanging out with a manatee in Ginny Springs. Love that photo. Okay, this is really cool. So, Wakulla Springs is one of the largest springs in Florida. I think it's the second, maybe the first. I don't know. They did a National Geographic exploration there. I'm trying to look see if I wrote down the year. Yeah, 1987. So there was 20 explorers involved in this expedition. And it was so massive that they had to get new power poles put in the state park in order to handle all the equipment that they needed, all the tanks that they had to fill. And this thing here is the habitat. This is so cool. So the problem of going, Wakulla is 300 feet underground, right? So that's a really, really deep. And there's a cavern beneath the lodge there. If you've ever been to the lodge at Wakulla Springs where you can eat, you can park a Boeing 747 in that cavern. It's that large. And then beyond it are miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of caverns and tunnels. So their idea was, let's go further than we've ever gone. I think at this point, the Wakulla divers have gone 5 miles off of without coming up. Now, can you imagine? So this was, a groundbreaking exploration. You had to get special, approval and everything. They had this problem that you had to decompress for so many hours in order to, I'm trying to see if I wrote, 15 to 20 hours, a 2-hour dive at 300 feet. You'd have to decompress for 15 to 20 hours. Now it's cold in that spring. So what are you going to do? You're just hanging there. You're going to get hypothermia. So they thought of a lot of different things. Could we pump warm water into the suits with tubes? What could we do? What are all these things that we could do as they're going up, up, up over these 20 hours? So they hit on this idea of building this habitat. And they got Rolex, the watchmaker, to sponsor this because the divers all wore the Rolexes. So, they could sit in this thing and it could be winched up. So once they could do their deco for some time, it's just sitting in the water, and then they could get inside this thing and they could have food in there. They could have, they got some fried mullet in there. They could read, they could listen to music. What was really cool at the time was they had a landline that could make international calls anywhere in the world, which everyone thought was the coolest thing because it was a geographic expedition. Building this thing was quite the engineering thing. They had to blow up these huge balloons in order to get it in the spring, and then at one point the balloon broke and the ballast fell down and they couldn't get to it. They had to put 12 tons of lead ballast on this thing to keep it because the spring flow was so strong coming out. And that's like 6 Toyota Camrys, I think I figured out. I had to do a lot. I'm not a math person, but I had to do a lot of math for this book because they're all math people, So this was the first expedition that they used these giant digital mappers to make pictures of the caves. And at that point, they were as big as like executive desks. They'd have to swim behind these things. So they had the habitat. They had the AquaZep scooters, which were, could get them back further. They had, huge crew of people. Now you're feeding 50 people every, 3 meals a day, all that kind of stuff as well. So these are really, really complex expeditions. This is one of the cave systems where they're using that Jupiter or Mars rover and the Jupiter, the robots that they use. That's what they're starting to do because they're trying to connect Wakulla Spring to the Gulf. Wakulla Spring is so critical to our water supply, and the city of Tallahassee messed up the water there by doing something they thought was a good idea environmentally. And that idea was that they were going to use our spray field from our sewer plant and grow crops south of the town. That sounds like a good idea. Then the crops would uptake the nutrients and, well, what happened was it all soaked into the ground and messed up Wakulla Springs. And Wakulla is no longer clear anymore. And it's kind of our fault. So the city shut down that operation. We're waiting years on to see, we redid our whole sewer plant and everything like that. So we're waiting to see if we can regain what the spring used to be. When I moved to Tallahassee, I was 26. I'm 60 now, so I saw it blue. I saw it swimming pool blue, and maybe some of you have too, seen the old swimming pool blue. It's not happening anymore because of the nutrients. Mostly excess fertilizer that are going into the ground. A lot of the multinational ag corporations will come into Florida and they'll land apply fertilizer prior to any crops going in because that's how you do it wherever they're from, Canada or whatever. And so this, of course, it just goes right into the aquifer and then comes up, and that's why the springs are coming up with the nutrients. It's not that they're rolling in, the springs are pumping out the nutrients. That was new science. No one understood that was what was happening. And the legacy pollution is in there for so long. I forget what the average year, I think maybe 37 years, I could be wrong there, but they date the spring water as it comes out. And the way that they date it is they use the markers of atmospheric atomic bomb tests and refrigerants, because these are things that have worldwide deposition. So if they're present, you know there's a certain time period in which this water acquired these pollutants, right? Okay, this is really cool. So, wait a minute, did I finish all the Wakulla things? Yes. Yes. That habitat weighed over 12 tons. Can you imagine? Unbelievable. And so they did this incredible film in Wakulla. They did this incredible film in Wakulla. I mean, carrying, and imagine that, you know, they say it about Ginger Rogers, right? She does everything that Fred Astaire does, only backwards and in heels. So imagine, not only is he doing this expedition, but he's filming it. So he's doing all the incredible athletic feats that everyone's doing, but he's going backwards and filming everybody as they're going through it. So really just amazing. So he made this whole amazing film and was sure this was his big lucky break, and it got bumped. So it ended up being like a foreign, like in foreign different countries they ran it, but he thought he was going to be in the centennial issue of National Geographic, but he got bumped. That's the thing about Geographic. I've worked for them too. You can work for them and you can do all this amazing stuff, and they will just bump you. They'll pay you a kill fee or whatever. So you never know. I mean, it's such a great publication, or was, or is, I guess. But it's a giant worldwide scientific organization, and there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of other things competing for whatever your story is. So he was always trying to get on the cover, and he did finally, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is Ice Island, and this was one of my favorite of Wes's films and one of my favorite adventures. I interviewed, in order to like ground truth all the expeditions, I knew that I had to talk to numerous people, because everyone remembers something differently. Like, what is the truth, right? It's the big debate in America now, right? But, you know, so I'd maybe interview 7 people who went on this expedition, and they would all tell me stuff. At near the end of my work, when I started this project, Wes had just recently died. And so his family graciously accepted me as his biographer. And so his everything was still as it was in his office. So I would go and, you know, talk to his family and look at the films, and there was so much film. There was extra film, there was documentaries, you know. And at the end of right when I was getting ready to, so I tracked down 7 people for every expedition. You know, this man made tons of films, explored all over the world. And then right at the end, when I was getting ready to start transcribing all this stuff, his widow says to me, "Oh, you might want to look at those journals over there." And I said, "What?" All of his dive journals were sitting there. First person. I mean, for a biographer, what could be more? I don't know why she didn't think of it. I love her. I love her so much, but I was like, ready to kill her. So I have his first person accounts of a lot of these things, and the original maps that he drew in the 70s and all. I mean, unbelievable. And then I was like, what am I going to do with these things? How do I manage these things? You know, I mean, my Lord, there's tons of them. So I sat there and read them all and photographed them with my phone and had them transcribed and all that kind of stuff. So it was very complex as a writer, trying to put this stuff together. And when you read the book, I hope you'll read the book. It's a breezy adventure story. There's excerpts of his writings in it, so you get it right from him, you know, which was really neat for me and really great for his kids. For their birthdays, I gave them their dad's journals, you know, all digitized, which was really cool. So they lost their dad when they were pretty young. So this is Ice Island. So what a crazy expedition this was. Wes went to Washington National Geographic headquarters, and he was trying to get to Antarctica. And the first thing he wanted to do was Shackleton. Is it Shackleton or Shackleford? Shackleton? Is that it? Shackleton? Yeah. The great explorer whose boat got encased in ice and all that. Let's go and see Shackleton's thing. The night before, he was Googling around, and it said that the largest iceberg in the history of the world had calved off of Antarctica. So he went in that next morning on the fly and said, we're going to go and get on this B12 or whatever. I forget what the name of it was. I might have it here. But we're going to get on this iceberg, and we're going to go to Antarctica. So imagine all the stuff they've got to carry on all the airports and everything, and to get everything out to, is it New Zealand where you come off to go to Antarctica? I think it is.
Yes.
So they get there, and they have this boat here. Now, this boat was not an icebreaker. This boat was way too small, according to everybody who saw it. But the captain, the Kiwi captain, was just this really kind of maniac, and he said, oh, the big ones tip, the little ones bob. So this, that ocean between the Ross Sea, between to Antarctica, we're talking about waves as tall as a 5-story building. It's the largest waves in the world because that part of the globe doesn't have anything to stop the currents. So this is such a harrowing journey, right, that they go on. The iceberg was as big as Connecticut, and it had as much fresh water to supply the U.S. for 5 years. You can believe that. This giant iceberg that had calved off. And sure enough, they did make it there. It's one of my favorite stories in the book. It's a harrowing tale of all the things that go wrong when you're in a place that's so cold, your tears freeze, and people went nuts on the boat, and rumor came that they weren't going to have enough food, and at one point the ice threatened to, crush the boat, just like Shackleton. And so and there's a film that he made of it. It's such a great film. This was the first time that they ever used a high-def camera, which you would need because everything's white, right? So it was very expensive equipment in extreme conditions. No one had ever swum beneath an iceberg before. Who's going to dive under an iceberg? They get under there, and it's like a Dr. Seuss world. It's all different colors. It's all these wild fish that glow. Who knew? You'd think it'd just be like nothing under there. It was an incredible botanical garden. And now people are doing this work, and they're using the ice to find out climate information. But back then, this was nuts. This was absolutely a crazy type of thing that you were doing. And Wes's wife, she was not allowed to ever say anything about anything. He told her when he married her, you're never allowed to say anything about it. This is what I do. This is what I do. You cannot be worried about me. You can't. But this was the one that scared her the most because there was no way to get a hold of these people, and they were certainly in a harrowing situation. And Wes was just a hot dog. Here he is getting lowered down with all of his camera gear. Look at these lenses, right? In the Antarctica. This is them. They're on the side of this. They're going to go under. This is his friends. They're going to go under this iceberg. No one counted on the fact that when you're next to an iceberg, there's a current that happens because of the temperature change between the water and the iceberg. And they got caught in this thing like you would get caught in a riptide out on the beach, right? And they were getting sucked down the side of this iceberg. And the only way they got out was there's these ice fish that make these little caves, these little tiny caves. So they put their fingers in and made their way out of the iceberg. And then they couldn't see the boat. That's how far they'd been pulled. He's got the camera, and he's doing this. Well, he ended up with frostbite because he was so worried about the equipment. And look, where's his hat? What the heck? Just crazy. These are explorers. They're just nuts. He ended up with frostbite, and they had to warm him up on the boat and everything like that. Now imagine that boat. They're out there for weeks and weeks. It's about 50 degrees on the boat. I mean, so uncomfortable. The drinking water is disgusting. Everybody's going crazy. So Wes would organize these. When they would get to an ice floe, he would organize football games and things like that to try to keep everybody. Feeling fun and stuff like that. They had a helicopter to take him to the iceberg because he wanted to be the first one on it. And the film, it's great when they get on the iceberg. But the helicopter had rusted shut. The things wouldn't work. He went out there. Who went out there? Wes did. Wes went out there and fixed this helicopter. He's underneath it, tinkering around with it. The whole deck, everything is sliding from one side to the other. He's out there trying to get all the equipment. He was just a very wild person. And he was going to do what was going to have to be done. in order to get there. And the film is absolutely beautiful. I love this film. If you ever get a chance, Ice Island. I think you can get it on YouTube, possibly. Do you know who Bill Curtis is? Bill Curtis is, you've heard him. He's the announcer for A&E. He's always on, Murder Tonight or whatever. He's on an NPR show called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. He was the Anchorman that they spoofed in Anchorman, the movie. He's a great guy. And he did a lot of these things with Wes. He was Wes's producer and Wes's backer. And Bill is the announcer in Ice Island, and it's hilarious because you can tell that he just thinks he's nuts. Okay, this is a wild adventure that it's in the book. This is in Hualta, and that's Hualta, which is in Mexico. It's the deepest cave ever explored. I think to this day it is. In order to get into this cave, the chapter is called The Hated Cave because it's so high wire and extreme exploration. They had to travel miles through the jungle. They had to rig ropes and pulleys. They had to rappel into a limestone hole, go past these raging waterfalls. Now, imagine they're doing that, but Wes is trying to stand on something and photograph them. This was in National Geographic. They went 3/4 miles deep and laid 2 miles of line from the hole that they entered into the surface. So they also brought in these fiber optic cables, but the local folks in the area were very mad about people going inside these caves. They did not like it. They didn't think it was respectful. And they would sniff the fiber optic cables, and they'd have to go back out and try to relay them. They lost a guy in this expedition. He was a diabetic, and he passed. He had a young son, and they had to, get him out and, get him back home. But his son, I don't know if you remember when those boys in Thailand were stuck in the cave. Well, that man's son was one of the rescuers. Isn't that funny? In order to dive this cave, you have to pack everything in and everything out, including your own waste. The way that they slept was they slept in hammocks that were hammered into the sides of these canyons. Absolutely incredible. And they get buried in this cave, and you'll have to read the book to find out all that stuff that happens. But they do get buried inside the cave and have quite an adventure getting out. And I think this is actually them trying to get out. They hated that cave. The hated cave. People are exploring Hualta now. Very high-tech explorations of it now. This is a wild story, but you'll just have to read in the book. This is from Australia. It's a very wild story about the outback and a little hole in the ground that they all went down in, and a crazy freak storm that occurred. This is a great white. In Wes's obituary or the final story of his death in the Washington Post, they talked about this moment where he, in South Africa, had gone to, what Shark Week is from Discovery Channel, so he went to South Africa to film the great whites. So I guess he had gotten like a shark cage that was not as good as you would hope, but he didn't know that. So he was in the shark cage, lowered down with the camera and everything, getting ready to chum in the water. And this great white shark went in the cage, like they broke the bars or whatever, and came right in. And he has film from inside the mouth of this beast. And everyone above ground thought he was dead. They could see the shark, and they thought he was dead, and they were all crying. And then, poof, he pops up. Well, most of the film that he shot, he found out he had loaded into the camera backwards. So he had to go back there on his own money and borrow money and go back and reshoot a whole bunch of it, because you have to be reliable. When these networks and stuff send you out on these crazy assignments, you have got to be able to handle yourself. And he'd screwed up, And of course you don't realize it because it's not digital. You don't know. He goes to look at his film after all that. he worked on a fishing boat in order to earn his keep to get out there, to get out to the sharks. And there's a wonderful part of the book where they're out fishing and the entire ocean is bioluminescent. And the local fishermen, they fish by seeing the silhouettes of the fish in the bioluminescence. And just imagine what that was like. And I got that from his own words, from his own journal. Just such a sense of wonder of what you can see in the world. He wasn't scared. Oh, here's the other thing. He wasn't scared at all of sharks. He'd gotten bit off at Jacksonville Beach. He was a surfer. He never was scared of any of those types of things. He got bit in the face by a fur seal. He would just keep going, like the Energizer Bunny. He would free dive with sharks, with great whites. No cage. Okay, this is kind of cool. So this is a submarine, believe it or not. So it's made with these articulated arms and articulated legs to be like you can walk in it, right? So he did this film called Walking Among the Sharks, and it was off of Vancouver Island. And there's a very special kind of shark there. I think it's a 6-gill shark that hang out way down the bottom. And so he wanted to film these things with this very famous photographer from Geographic called Emery Kristoff. And so he was in this thing. There was levers in it, like the Great and Powerful Oz or whatever. And this thing would walk along. And he had great hopes of doing so many different things with the 20,000 Leagues of the Sea, like walking between continents and islands and things like that. They still use these. It's called a newt suit, after the inventor is a guy named Newt. And they use them when they build bridges, things like that, lay cable across the sea for internet and all that kind of stuff. So it's really neat because it's a sub. You don't have to carry any air with you. It's a submarine, right? Pretty cool. He loved the gadgets, and who wouldn't? I just love that picture of him because he's just like having such a ball. Okay. So this is Jenny Springs, and now we're going to come back to our Florida, the end of the talk, which is about Florida, really, because there's a lot of adventures in here that you can read about all over the world that are neat. But really, the thing about Wes, and the reason that they asked me to be his biographer for the state, was that he was a water protector for our state. He was one of the first divers who came up and said what was going on with the aquifer. Most wouldn't want to say I was down under your land, sir. But he wanted to tell people, look, we're seeing stuff. We're seeing weird green stuff inside the caves. We don't know where this stuff is coming from. This is Ginny, and this is really cool because that's, whoops. This is like their air, right? That's like, it bubbles. But so he did what you would do. He started by going to his county commission. Hey, look, these dairies are messing up the springs. We're seeing all this stuff in here. And they didn't care. And then he was like, he went to the Water Management District. He said, look, I've got all these maps. I drew all these maps. I can show you where all the things go. And they really didn't care. They didn't really want the maps. And then he ended up, Jeb Bush at the time appointed him to be part of the Springs Task Force. And so he became part of the Springs Task Force. But he was, it's very frustrating because the laws are very difficult to change. And, there was a lot of talk about improving things, but they didn't really change the modeling. And that's the biggest problem that we have right now. The modeling for pollutants in Florida is wrong. And everyone will admit it. The hydrogeologists who work will admit it. The university people will admit it. What he was saying was there's rivers underground. It's not like you spill some gasoline in Nebraska and it just goes straight out of the Ogallala Aquifer. And that's the model, what our model says, when in fact there's siphons and rapids and strange things. And he was explaining, we've been down there. And they were like, no, we've got these models, we have these cores. And he was like, no, we've been down there. That map is still sitting in his office that he drew of the entire watershed and where all the things, with the arrows. Like they knew where all the water went. They would do dye tests where they would put in dye and they'd think, it'll come out, about 4 hours later. Well, it could be 2 weeks. They'd be waiting around for 2 weeks with all these volunteers and would go home because there's so many intricacies of how the water moves. So he was trying to be an evangelist. Like, look, we've got to change how we manage these. We've got to change how we manage, how we Now, he was not anti-water bottling, and as a matter of fact, he worked for the water bottlers. Wes had the opinion that if you're going to have an industry, have one that cares about clean water, that it's their bottom line. So the water bottlers were actually the best advocates against these giant mega dairies that were coming in. It's the dumbest thing in the world to put giant dairies on top of the largest store of water on the planet. But that's what happens all the time because the Columbia County Commission or whatever doesn't care. They're like, fine, we'll come make a giant manure field. So he was, he was constantly trying to tell people this. And it was very frustrating for him. Politics is very frustrating. I covered the legislature for many years and the governor for many years, and I know it is very frustrating. It's very hard. It's hard. It's hard to come to agreement. It's hard to solve problems. It's complicated. It's really difficult. And I think it just killed him. He hated it. But he kept doing it. He went to the Capitol. He really loved Jeb Bush, and he really talked to him and took him on the itch-tuck knee and all this kind of stuff. And he really felt that he was trying to make a difference. But what he finally realized was, we gotta teach the kids. We gotta start over. Because these people are not getting it. These people are just not getting it. So we gotta start with the kids. So he started his most famous work, which is called Water's Journey. And you can get this on YouTube. And it's fascinating. It was the first time anybody ever filmed people above ground and underground. So that his friends were below the ground, underneath the Sonny's Barbecue restaurant. You're like, oh, you're going to turn to the left at the salad bar. They were holding a rod of ferrite, with a detector from the top, because you can't just GPS way down in there. Like at that time, you couldn't. So this was the first time they went under golf courses. They went under people's patios, and the film was just great. So it was basically made for 8th graders, but it worked for like county commissioners as well, so, well, for all of us, who knew? But it's a great film. The first one is called Water's Journey, Hidden Rivers, and you can watch it. And then he did like 2 more. Then he started doing them for the state during the Bush administration. He did 2 more, one under the Everglades and one up the St. Johns River, which is really neat because he used a flying boat, which was really cool. And so that's what he set out to do, was get this into schools so that kids could understand what a resource these springs were. Another part of that effort of getting the local county commissions to understand what a resource they had was we got old-timers and filmed them and had picnics so that they could say, hey, yeah, we used to swim in here and we had fish fries and just to engender. So now if you drive through Columbia County and High Springs, it will say, watershed of such and such a spring. Like there's awareness now more, and the kids all get this in their curriculum. They should all over the school. I wish that this book was taught in all the schools. It is being taught in some schools, as a biography and stuff like that. So, that's one of the ones that he did for the Everglades. That's him. This is at the point where, he's pretty much a top dog. He's got all the great equipment. He's being asked to film all over the world, and the Everglades one's pretty neat too. This is one of my favorite Wes Skiles photos. It looks like that boat is just floating, doesn't it, in the air? This is, I'm thinking this is either Mill Pond or Cypress Springs. The springs that are to the west of the Apalachicola River have not come up green yet. They're still blue. And you can still go and do some of those runs over there that are just blue like they were when I moved to Florida and first became an environmental reporter. Itch-tuck knee is not blue anymore. It's clear, but it's green. I just love that photo. I have it framed at my house. This is another one of them exploring our aquifer, where your water comes from. I think not far from this, there were wellheads that they knocked on to scare the people. What he would want from us is to engender the responsibility and the love for our water supply, and for people to know that you can't make new water. This is Wes shortly before he died. This is in the Bahama blue holes. Who knew the Bahamas are like this underneath? They're just magical. And this is where he made the photograph. This is one of the top 10 photographs of all time in National Geographic. This photograph took months and crews of people. It's a stitcher, so it's 3 or more maybe. And it shows really the mastery. The original of this hangs in the photo department at Geographic. It's huge. It's all along the wall. So many lights and painting with the light and figuring out where the light goes and hiding people behind things to shine lights in certain ways. You know, in the beginning they would just use like garbage can lids and stuff, but you know, to what they would do was, as the diver went through, they would kind of like hide the light and then open the light to make it have movement. But this is one of the really just one of his masterworks. This is the photo that was the pullout for when he got the cover of National Geographic. He had seen the proof of the cover before he died, but he never saw the actual cover because he died just before it came out, which was just, he finally got the cover. I mean, there's so many writers and photogs that had, you know, were all looking for that brass ring of the cover of Geographic, and he did get it. And this was the big pullout. It's hard to get the pullout too. It's really hard. This is Wes on that shoot. You can see now he's got the incredible cameras, the ones that do the 360. But you know, a shoot like that, you're hiking through thorny things and 95-degree heat when carrying all this equipment. So it was really quite the expedition. This is Wes Skiles Peacock Springs State Park. A neat thing about it, it's near Live Oak. A neat thing about it is the trails tell you what's below you. A cool thing about Peacock Springs is one time these folks were diving in there, Chuck Exley, who I mentioned earlier, and they thought that there was an earthquake and they were just flipping out because they were going to get trapped in there, and it was a train right above them. The tracks go right through there. It's just a little trail. It's worth checking out. It's dark. They're dark though. The sinks are dark. They're almost black tannin. But it's one of the most extensive cave systems. You would never even know it. You just think, look at that, you know, nasty looking, you know, sink there, and then you get in there and it's just amazing. There's a lot of film of Peacock on YouTube. You can see a lot of underwater photography of it. And that's Wes's wife, Terry. It's the head of DEP at the time. And then closing, that's Ginny Springs with the mist coming off of it. You know, I really appreciate you taking the time to hear the talk, and I hope that you'll be ambassadors for our water and tell others about what's at stake and do what you can to save our precious springs. We have 1,000 springs in Florida. Everybody's at the beach, but boy, oh boy, do we have an incredible resource. And if you want to get my book, I don't have any with me, but you know, you can find it anywhere. And I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, I'm glad to answer any questions if you want. Yeah.
That's a great talk.
Thank you.
In your research, did you encounter Noel Swam?
I don't think so.
So Noel was on one of the original National Geographic expeditions where they explored Wahola, and he helped to develop some of the breathing apparatus.
Oh.
He's an anesthesiologist, so with his knowledge of ventilators and gas exchange,
wow.
He helped develop some of the early equipment that scrubbed the carbon dioxide out.
Yeah, the rebreathers.
And so he grew up in Texas, and he was a spelunker, and he told me that he learned to dive so he could go in the cave.
Wow. The rebreathers, that's what Wes died on. They're tricky. They're great though. They've changed everything because it just scrubs your own. It's like a moon explosion. You don't need to carry anything because it scrubs your own breath. Yeah. Well, it's great technology.
In a surgical circuit, they have a canister that will absorb some of the carbon dioxide so they can reuse the oxygen and stuff.
It changed everything because they could stay down longer and yeah.
So he's his acquaintance, not buddy. He's an acquaintance of mine.
That's pretty cool.
But he's a wild guy.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even know that this whole subculture exists. You know, I had no idea. I knew Wes just, you know, as the above ground.
So it sounds like he started off as an adventurer who evolved into different roles. Are there others like him? The tribe that you described are adventurers.
Yes. But as far as advocates,
Yeah.
well, I will say that Wes's daughter, Tessa, she is now photographing the springs. And she has her friends, they wear mermaid outfits. And they have a young person's clean water group where they do all these photos for Instagram of these mermaids and showing the springs and stuff like that. So there are younger people doing that. Not older, the older cave drivers, there is, I shouldn't say that, but the Wakulla Karst Plain Project is the hot dog divers now. And they're doing all the scientific work. We're learning a lot about climate by that. The Bahamas trip was one of the first ones where they took the stalagmites and stalactites, and they can date like with tree rings, climatology. So they learned a ton of stuff about you know, things that happened on the Earth in the past, and that's what these Wakulla explorers are doing. The person who led the original Wakulla expedition that I showed you the habitat is a guy named Bill Stone. And he did the space rovers, and so that's why the space rovers are going to be used by those Wakulla Karst Plain. So there are technical divers doing this work all over. Another cool thing they're doing is there's vents, and I get into this a little bit in the book, and I might get this a little bit wrong, but I'll just tell you like the wonder of it. There's vents in the bottom of the ocean that fresh water comes out of. And they're finding the same species of plants and stuff at all of them, which means that there could be like big old Swiss cheese networks of fresh water inside the planet. I thought that was pretty cool. So there's people doing that work. And now they have, of course, those really deep sea submarines that they can get in, which just changed everything. Yeah.
I was curious about like what's kind of the most significant kind of like challenges or problems that they have with scuba diving for such a long period of time? Like, is it communication, lighting, breathing?
Yeah, the gases. The gases. Whether you have air on board or whether you're using a rebreather. I mean, you have to go to the bathroom in your suit. That's weird. You know, so you got to make sure you eat. You know, like all that kind of stuff. Like, how do you manage all that? But definitely hypothermia in these cold environments, if you don't have the proper, you know, equipment, is a big challenge. Panic is a big challenge. Not getting panicky, getting lost. And then making sure you have the right mix of gases. Because that's really what people die from. You know, there was a lawsuit when Wes died about the rebreather that he was wearing. He borrowed it from somebody. Obviously, the oxygen sensors had been recalled on the model before. I don't get into that too much in the book, but there was a big drama around that. They were unsuccessful in their lawsuit. But I mean, it's cutting edge equipment. So it's definitely the equipment that'll get you. That's the biggest challenge, making sure that you have a fail-safe and a safe and a safe, and that you stay calm. Yeah.
With all this exploring, did they find any artifacts or any archaeological stuff? Is that left there, or did they bring anything back into the museum?
No, they leave it. I'll tell you one of the coolest things is they're so interesting to interview because they'll be like, we went 400 feet, and then we went 600 feet, and then they'll be like, and then we went by these Mayan skulls, and then we were like, whoa, what? We went by Mayan skulls. And they'll be like, yeah. And they know that they're Mayan because they put boards against babies' heads. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Weird. Just to flatten them. So they would find these skulls like that. Lots of things like that. Like I said, camel bones, mastodons. At the Osceola River, near where I live, outside of Tallahassee, they found an entire mastodon, brought it up, and it's in the museum in Gainesville. Is it the Natural History Museum? Ancient fishes we don't have anymore. Weird snake eel, like old eels. I mean, that part was fascinating to me. And I wonder if somebody could just do years ago when I was a young reporter, one of the people who worked for the state archaeology department came to me, and he showed me these films of inside a sink that was outside of Tallahassee, and that was his interest. And I wonder if he might write a book at some point about underwater archaeology. His name is Mike Weisenbaker, and he was part of a bunch of crews of people who were looking just for that very thing. And, like in Wakulla, they've seen like places where there was campfires. So there would be, carbon from the smoke on top of the underwater cave still there. And of course, the spring water is will preserve things pretty well. But it's controversial because it's not in situ, like everything's moving. So you can't say for sure, okay, there's a mastodon bone here. It's got a little nick out of it, but where's the arrowhead? There's always that trying to link everything up. But for sure, they found tons of tools. People throw stuff in there. That's the other thing that if you get on YouTube and watch Water's Journey, the first one, Hidden Rivers, that's one thing they'll talk about. They'll say, people think when they throw things in there, they're throwing it away. And I mean, it's true. They'll just back up pickup trucks and just dump stuff in there. That's what's happening all over Springs Country. It's your water. People throw toilets in there. You're throwing a toilet in your drinking water. Like, hello. I was shocked when I found that out, that people would throw stuff like that in there. You know what else was in there? Tons of them? Newspaper boxes. What? Vending boxes. I guess people would steal the coins out of them, and cars. They found ambulances. They found county fire trucks in Springs. But yeah, especially in Mexico, there's a lot of archaeology in there. Pottery.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it. And congratulations on your beautiful town. It is so pretty, and I can't wait to drive on and see it. It's so beautiful. Thank you.
So we're now going to have the exhibit opening and reception back at the museum.
All right, thank you. There you go.